we're going to talk all about empathy and social enterprise. Okay, so two of my absolute passions are social enterprise and empathy, and you'll see that in a second. So my mission at Empathy First is to create a world where every single person feels heard, valued, and visible. And to my mind, social enterprise is absolutely where that lives in business. So if you would like to reach out to me, empathyfirst.com.au, you can find me on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, all the places. And if you would like to ask me any questions or talk about anything that we've covered today, you can email me. Really quickly, a little bit about me. So Empathy First is my social enterprise that I run, and I absolutely love it. I also work as Membership Engagement Officer here at QSEC, which means that I get to marry up both of those passions, which is really looking at how social enterprise works, how we can build the sector. And then I also lecture and tutor social enterprise at QUT. So the intention for this session is whenever we talk about anything in social enterprise, we talk about intention, and we talk about being able to change things in the world, attitudes, behavior, conditions. So when we talk about it at Empathy First, what I want you to do is reframe your thinking a little bit, learn practical, memorable skills, and I'll give you a hint of those today, but also what we want to do is create this culture of empathy. So we're going to do a little bit of activity first. What I want you to do is I want you to think about your best ever boss or coworker. Your best ever boss or coworker. Think about that person. And I want you to think about what they did or said. I want you to think about how they made you feel. And I want you to think about whether your behavior changed as a response. Well, what did they have in common? So if there were too many to choose just one, think about what they have in common. What did they say or do that they had in common, and how did you feel as a result? They listened and asked questions. They walked the walk. Oh, what does that mean, Greg?
Well, they tried everything themselves first. And if it didn't work, they'd change it or tweak it so it did.
Yep. Absolutely. So they were willing to take a risk, to be wrong, to be vulnerable, to not have all the answers, to not just do as I say, not as I do.
Spot on. Yeah.
And they're the sorts of leaders that we want. We want someone who leads by example. We want someone who listens to us and makes us feel heard. They always wanted to know more. They asked questions when they didn't know something. They were problem solvers and had a sense of humor. Absolutely. So when you're with these people, how do you feel? What sort of emotions come up when you're with these types of people and leaders and co-workers? How do you feel? Warm and connected? Yeah, they're great words. That my voice is warranted. Oh, at our heart of hearts, that's what we want, isn't it? We want to feel valued, respected, appreciated. Take the next step. Did your behavior change as a result of being respected, valued, appreciated, heard? Does your behavior change at work, at home, with your friends, whoever? Does your behavior change when you feel those things? Through the roof, motivated? Absolutely. Absolutely. So what you guys can do, so we feel more appreciated, we feel more motivated, we want to come to work, we do a good job, we go the extra mile, we go above and beyond, we care about the business. So that's what we're going to talk about today, but we're going to talk a lot about social enterprise. So I am going to give you a lot of content today. And if you do want to go over any of this with me, feel free. I'm happy to chat at any time. So if we think about it, I mean, you can do the worst boss later and you kind of go, because when we feel micromanaged and put down and not trusted, then we feel a bit, and we don't want to go to work and we put in less effort. So that all makes perfect sense. So the reason for this activity is I want you guys to make notes of this and then go, oh, that's the leader I aspire to be, because that's how I want people to feel about me and my business and the impact that we're having. So putting down something aspirational in terms of your leadership is a really good way to go, oh, they're the qualities that I aspire to be. Actually, the research shows, because we're all social entrepreneurs in one way or another, characteristics of successful entrepreneur, oh my God, entrepreneurs are self-awareness, empathy, accountability, and resilience. Okay, so we're going to focus on the empathy piece today. But what you will learn is you can't have empathy unless you have self-awareness. So that's where we're going. Now, when I talk about social enterprise, whenever I teach it with my students or talk to any of you guys about social enterprise, I always use this framework. And for me, it's do good, do well, be good. So do good is the problem we're trying to solve in the world, whether it's jobs for marginalized people or improvement in mental health or less plastic in the ocean. That's our do good piece. All social enterprises must start there. Do well is we must generate a revenue in order to achieve that impact. So we trade something and we'd like to do well in trading that. Be good is wanting to do that in a ethical, sustainable, empathetic way. So when we look at how empathy fits into this, whenever you're designing a program, so human-centered design begins with empathy. If we want to design really good programs, we design with people, not for people. If we want to do well, our marketing and our customer relationships must be based in empathy. If we want to be good, we have to be empathetic with our teams, our suppliers, our stakeholders. So these are all the elements that empathy fits into, whereas a lot of times when people think about empathy and social enterprise, it's give, 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 give. It's all about the beneficiary. It's the impact we're having. And a lot of times the marketing and the customers and the suppliers, stakeholders, and our teams are often left out. So really, really important that when we look at empathy, and I'll give you a definition in a second, we look at all of our business and making sure that every single person who interacts with our business feels heard, valued, and visible. So I'm going to cover these topics really quickly today. It's going to be a really sort of snappy overview, but what is empathy, why it's vital for you, your business, your impact, your customers, your clients, everybody, and how to incorporate more empathy into your social enterprise. So what is empathy? Really quick overview, because unless we're all talking about the same thing, empathy is actually really hard to define. And it's really hard to discuss because there are 3 types of empathy. So we need to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing first. So the first type is what's called emotional empathy. That's you're sad, I'm sad, we're all sad together. And what happens a lot of times in social enterprise, especially if we're working with like really, really vulnerable people, what can happen is I jump down your emotional rabbit hole, but I don't fully climb back out and take care of myself. So you'll see, I feel what you feel, and sometimes I neglect my own emotional needs in the process. So it's really looking at, if we are going to do the emotional empathy piece, and we need to sometimes, but we need to fully take care of ourselves and come out of that emotional rabbit hole so that we can bring our full selves to our next client. Okay, because what do you think? Put it in the chat. What do you think would happen in social enterprise, particularly if we just lived in emotional empathy? If we just kept jumping down the emotional rabbit holes and didn't come back out fully. So if we burn out, can you create the impact that you want to create in the world if you're exhausted, burnt out, and you're self-sabotaging? Can you create the impact that you want to create if you're doing those things? No, absolutely. So emotional empathy is important, but it's not where we live. Cognitive empathy is also important, but again, not where we live, because what can happen is once you've been doing this for a long time and you see lots and lots of people, you can get into that space of going, well, I know what you need. I know what you feel. I know what it's like to be you, even if you've been in that situation. And what that does is it often will cut out that need to listen, and we will jump straight to conclusions. And so that person then doesn't feel heard, valued, and visible. So I know what you feel, and sometimes I get it wrong because I make assumptions or I don't respond empathetically. So you can see that my little person in pink is feeling one thing, my little dude in blue is making an assumption, and he's kind of getting it a bit wrong. Okay. Now, compassionate empathy is where we live. The ability to share and understand the feelings of another person and respond appropriately. Okay, and respond appropriately is really, really, really important. And I'll talk about why when we talk about the why piece. But it's the ability to listen and connect. If we're not playing in that space and we're not responding with empathy, what we can do is make people feel dismissed. Now, that's not our intention. But as a social enterprise, what we want to do is make sure that every single person who has an interaction with our business feels heard, valued, and visible, and that's bigger than just our beneficiaries. So I'm here with you, it's behind my thing, I'm here with you while still honoring my whole own self. I strive to communicate in a way that makes you feel heard, valued, and visible. My aim is to listen and connect. So you can see that there are elements of emotional empathy in there, and you can see there are elements of cognitive empathy in there. But that's where we live. I'm standing beside you, honoring your whole self. Like I said a minute ago, whenever in Empathy First we talk about empathy, we talk about 3 levels of empathy, and they are empathy for your clients, your colleagues, your beneficiaries, your customers. And I do sort of this because it's kind of a downward, here's us and where these are the people that we interact with. We want to have empathy for our colleagues and our staff, so that internal empathy for people who work with us, our volunteers, and also for ourselves, because like we just said, if we're not taking care of ourselves and listening to our own emotional needs, we will burn out, and then we can't have the impact that we want to have in the world. There is a really big risk in social enterprise, especially for people who haven't come at this from a, I'm going to say an academic point of view almost, where they've done lots and lots of research to come to the best possible model for their social enterprise. A lot of people who come into social enterprise go, oh, I see a problem that needs solving in the world. I'm going to create a business and solve that problem. Now, what can happen is if we take the empathy piece out of that, we then get into this mindset that people are humans to be heard, not problems to be solved. So that's where we want to live. People are humans to be heard, not problems to be solved. Okay, and you see it talked about a lot in the mental health space, which is somebody tells you something vulnerable and you go, oh, it could be anxiety, it could be a panic attack, it could be, and we go into this red alert action plan problem solving mode, and that's not what helps our beneficiaries, it's not what helps our customers. So it's really about getting back into that mindset of, if somebody tells you something, or if you're working with somebody, or if you're working with your beneficiaries or designing a program, people are humans to be heard, not problems to be solved. So when you're listening, you have to go into listener mode. You have to go into validation mode, into acknowledgement mode, that that person's experience is real for them and absolutely deserves your presence. Really important. This one's really important to keep in mind. Empathy, compassionate empathy, cannot coexist with judgment, assumptions, or expectations. So whether you're talking to your friend, your neighbor, your beneficiary, or your customers, you cannot have someone tell you something and then swoop in with advice, swoop in for what they should just be doing, or how they should be reacting, or how you should be reacting, or a solution for them. You have to choose whether we're going to make assumptions about people, judge them, and have expectations for how they behave, react, or whether we're going to dig a little bit deeper and get curious and have empathy and listen to that person's story as their whole self. Now, we see a little bit of this in social enterprise, especially for students who really don't have a world view, but we see a bit of this in social enterprise when we go, well, if we do this program, this is the results, instead of going, oh, hang on, what is it that people actually need? What's the actual need that is going on for that particular group? Instead of going, well, I know what they need. This worked for me, it'll work for everyone. So it's just keeping in mind that, and also when you look at the language that we use and the language other people use around you, really easy to pick people who aren't empathetic, because they'll do these 3 things. And when we do the full course, I'll show you how this stuff can be fatal. Has your understanding of empathy changed in the last 5 minutes? Because it's really important that we're all talking about the same thing. Okay, so especially for the stuff we're about to talk about, or if we want to become a more empathetic social enterprise or a more empathetic society, unless we're all talking about the same definition, it's really hard. Because you imagine 2 people having a conversation, one person's talking emotional empathy, one person's talking cognitive empathy. They're talking about 2 different things. So we need to remember the definition, which is the ability to share and understand the feelings of another person and respond appropriately, and that it is at every level. It's internal to yourself, internal to your social enterprise, and then external to your stakeholders and customers and clients. So I'm going to give you a few justifications as to why my business even exists. First one is at the beginning of human-centered design, which is the absolute fundamental design principle that social enterprises must follow. Step one's empathize, but you think if everybody's talking a different definition and we're not considering empathy within the team, when you have empathy within a team, especially in social enterprise, but any design team, that's when the good stuff happens. That's when we get creative and innovative, because we feel like we have room to be ourselves, like we have room to fail forward. Okay, so that piece is really, really important, because that's where you get the best programs. And when you get the best programs, you get the best impact. But a lot of us in social enterprise work with vulnerable people. And here's a really quick wordy slide, but it's a stat. If 1 in 5 of us, and for a lot of social enterprises and our beneficiaries even higher, age 16 to 85 experience a mental illness in any year. So that's 1 in 5. Over 50% do not disclose or seek support for their mental health, often due to a perceived or actual stigma about mental ill health, and not knowing that the people they live and work with, they don't know how to respond lovingly and effectively. So they don't know who is safe. So that's a really, really massive, massive statistic. So the reason I put that one on is if we think about it from a personal perspective, if we feel like we're struggling and we reach out to somebody and they go, oh, you should, here's a pamphlet, or you should just talk to HR. And we kind of recoil backwards. Are we likely to tell anybody anything ever again? I know, like in my experience, no. And then what happens? And then what happens? And then what happens? And we can talk for days about things like social isolation and worsening of symptoms and self-harm. Like, we could keep going down there. But for today, I want you guys to remember that if you're not part of the 20%, you're part of the 80%, and the 80% needs to learn to listen with love and kindness to make the 20% feel safe. For your business, 82% of employees would consider leaving their job for a more empathetic organization. Now, keep in mind, to replace somebody usually costs 6 to 9 months' salary, but 93% of employees are likely to stay with an empathetic employer. That's what you guys told me right at the beginning. Couple more things. Empathy is an important element for successful customer-employee relationships. So perceptions of service quality, brand reputation, trust and connection are all really, really solidly built on empathy of your frontline staff, empathy of your leadership team, empathy of your volunteers. If they know how to communicate with empathy, you will get better results from your programs, because people will trust and hang around and speak highly of you. I mean, you guys think about it. If you get bad service from a bank teller, you don't go, wow, Janet was having a bad day today. You go, no, I hate Bank X. And you're probably more likely to put it on, you're actually 10 times more likely to put it on social media that Bank X sucks than you are to say, wow, Janet was nice to me. Also, if you're wondering about cash, the top 10 companies in the Global Empathy Index increased in value more than twice as much as those in the bottom. 50% more earnings based on empathy. Why do you think, from all the different levels, why do you think empathy is important for your social enterprise? What are the benefits and for whom?
So Barbara and I were talking about, that's how social enterprises are set up, right? So, they're all based on the true empathy for that beneficiary or for that particular cohort or that particular problem. Where we were really talking about from that perspective is actually going, well, there's a real tension for social entrepreneurs, because here we are, super empathetic. And even, we were talking about even for QSEC, being in the COVID mix, really trying to sit back and hearing everybody's pain points and really empathizing and leaning into, listening and creating that space for people to have their voice and have their lessons heard or whatever that was. And then for us to be jumping into the problem solving space and just like, Barbara was saying too, there's a real tension as an entrepreneur, because, entrepreneurially, we're set up to solve problems.
Yeah.
So, looking at those 3 stages of empathy, or the 3 states of empathy, was really clarifying for us to kind of go, there's the innate tension of being a social entrepreneur.
Yeah. And one of the things that we're not going to cover it today, but one of the things that's really, really important in social enterprise is knowing your boundaries, is knowing what you are and are not responsible for, because there will be some things that in your role, yes, that's cool. You're responsible for it. You can help. But sometimes we need to really know where our personal boundaries are, where our business boundaries are, what we can and can't help with, what we are and are not responsible for. And that can relieve a lot of tension, because we want to keep jumping down the rabbit holes. We want to keep fixing all the things. So we're going to cover that in a second. So really, really important when we talk about...
Leanne, can I just ask, is there a cure for jumping down the rabbit hole and wanting to fix it?
Sort of, and I'll tell you about it in a second.
Excellent.
Sort of. But it has to begin with and end with self-care. And so part of the solution is recognizing that you cannot keep jumping down rabbit holes, because you will burn out. And that's a boundary and a self-respect. And knowing that if you practice self-care and you model self-care and you recognize that empathy is not give, 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 then hopefully you'll recognize this bit. And this isn't for other people. This is for you guys as the social entrepreneur, as the person who wants to give, who the person, I mean, you see the word empath written around. That's very, very emotional empathy. Those people who have really, really poor boundaries and just keep jumping. They just keep jumping down that rabbit hole. So what I need you guys to remember, that you matter. You are important, and you deserve to be loved. You deserve to be heard, and you are valuable to your colleagues, your clients, your family, and your friends, and your mission. If you burn out, if you keep give, if you keep jumping down the emotional empathy rabbit hole without practicing and modeling good self-care, you are not honoring your mission. Does that make sense? It's really, really important, because what we want to do, we want to be all the things for all the people. And we can't be. So in order to be the best you possibly can be for the next person and the next person, and have the impact that you want to have, you need to believe this stuff. And sometimes this is where the problem lies. Sometimes. Because we think that the mission is bigger than us. And it's not. You have, and the research shows you have better impact when you are empathetic in a responsible, healthy way. And your clients get better outcomes. So now we're going to talk a little bit about this self-realization piece, but people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, especially in social enterprise. If you're going out there telling people what they need to do because you have the answers, really, really hard then, because that's why we focus on our why. Why do you care? Why am I giving you my time, effort, money, patronage? Why? So this statement is so important, and it sums it all up, because if somebody gives you advice and you go, you didn't listen, I don't know, you didn't. But if we are that entrepreneurial spirit of we want to get things right and we want to make a difference and we're helpers in the world and we're the top of the class and we're this, that, and the other, and we put our value in helping others, what we can do then is we skip the empathy piece and go straight into problem solver mode.
Yep.
And that's not what people need, because none of you said at the beginning, my best boss had the best answers. They gave the best unsolicited advice ever. None of you said that. So we need to tap back into who we want to be as leaders because of who other people have made us feel, like what other people have made us feel. So if you sit in this kind of space, then we need to just quickly reevaluate, reframe our thinking into your value is in you, not in how smart you are, not in having the answers, not in knowing the right things, because anybody can research anything, and we give you lots and lots of language tools when we do big, like half-day courses and stuff. But your value is in you, your presence, your listening, your making heard. That's where your value lies, and every single one of you said that for your best boss. every single one of you went, I felt heard, I felt valued, I felt appreciated. Not one of you said, oh, they just gave the best advice. I felt dismissed. Okay, so it's just reframing our thinking. And sometimes this is uncomfortable, but you're allowed to listen and connect and design with people. You're allowed to be vulnerable. You're allowed to make mistakes. You're allowed to listen and not have the answers. One of the things I always tell people, I've told this to American cops. I've run workshops for police in America and gone, you're allowed to be a human first and your role second, especially in social enterprise. And sometimes we forget that because we go, oh my God, I've got a business to run. I've got all the things. I want to solve the problems and I want to do the things. And we kind of have to take a breath and go, oh, that person's told me something as a human being and I need to value and honor that human being as their whole self. I might not have an answer. There might not be an answer, but them sharing with me is an act of trust and vulnerability, and I need to respect that. Sometimes you will never understand what someone is going through, and that's okay. That's perfectly fine. So you've got to be a human first, social entrepreneur second, because that's where the good stuff happens. We can talk a little bit about cognitive empathy if we wanted to. And this is a much bigger discussion if we were going to talk, but I never let anybody play in cognitive unless they know the compassionate first. But if you were going to play in the cognitive empathy space, what you can do to try and understand people is do what we call empathy mapping. This is always the last thing that you do after you've figured out what it is and why it matters. But it helps you understand what might be going on for somebody. But this is cognitive empathy because you all know what empathy is now. And I can talk about different kinds and you're like, that makes perfect sense. This is cognitive empathy. The only way you're going to then validate this is by talking to the actual person saying, does this feel right? We need to validate this because if we just do a big assumptive empathy map and act on that, we could be missing the mark entirely. So if we design a program for a refugee based on my middle-class suburban upbringing, I will design a bad program. Doesn't matter how much Googling I do. So I need to be vulnerable, ask the questions, get it wrong, be willing to be wrong and go, well, this is what I think. And so, like one of my upcoming podcasts is going to be on refugees. This is what I think. Tell me what it's really like. Let me listen to you as a whole person, not as a problem to be solved. Okay, so empathy mapping is a really good tool, but again, advanced. Because if you put this in the hands of people who don't know what compassionate empathy is, the risk is then that they go just sweeping assumptions, sweeping generalizations without designing with people. Be aware of the language in your social enterprise. I have heard people use words like, oh, we deal with these people when they're talking about their beneficiaries. That's a cultural thing in your business that we need to change. We don't deal with these people. We interact with our clients, we have relationships with, but this is real othering, dehumanizing language. When I talk about really simple, memorable, easy to follow steps, we do give quite in-depth ones and we play with them a lot more in the workshops. But what we do is under all circumstances, never, ever, ever from this point forward will these two words escape your lips. Please. Should and just. You should just see a counsellor. You should get out of bed. You should empty the dishwasher. You should just stop smoking. Whatever the thing is, if we're using the words should and just, it means we haven't listened and we haven't empathized and all we're doing is projecting. All we're doing is projecting our expectations, our judgment, our assumptions onto other people. And it's a way of creating distance because I don't want to go there. We're going to go back into groups. I've given you a lot of hows. Rachel, did that answer your hows question? It didn't. What's the hows question?
Well, we ended up coming up with a few.
Okay.
But it was more around, I think a few of us are working with clients that have customers,
Yes.
and we can find ourselves overcompensating to try and appease everyone. But one of the things was around to never have expectations, but then obviously we do have expectations put on us. And how do you start that communication piece based on sort of KPIs and the general business models and communication and conversation and things like that? And Mark might actually be able to explain this better than me because he did as we were talking, but versus like not having expectations of other people, but the people that we're working with don't necessarily have that same training and things like that as we may in the future.
So as much as I'd love empathy training to be like everywhere, what we're really talking about in terms of expectations, I'm allowed to have performance expectations, I'm allowed to have business expectations, I'm allowed to have all these sorts of things. What I am not allowed to have is an emotional expectation. So in order to get to the really decent, good conversations that you want to have about performance and KPI and business and mission and strategy and vision and all that sort of stuff, we're talking about that millisecond in the middle. And it comes back to culture and self-reflection, because if we've built that culture and when we have conversations with people, we've built that trust and everybody knows that you're allowed to be your whole self and have your emotions and be supported and all those sorts of things, then if we go straight from somebody having a rough time to performance management, that's a lose-lose situation. But what we need to do is take a moment, take a breath, talk to that person with curiosity and kindness and go, what's going on? Is there something that's going on for you that maybe we haven't addressed, or that I can help with? And we give lots of lovely frameworks in the training of how to do that. But if you finish it with, well, let's figure out a solution, or let's work out something so that it's a win-win. So how do I support you to meet your KPIs? But so long as that person feels heard, valued, and visible in that process, then you have the KPIs and then you just have a normal business conversation.
Yeah, I guess my follow-on conversation from that is, how do you have that? Well, let's do this, this, and this, and it being the self-care that you're just kind of adding on more onto your workload, and it's not.
No. Because empathy is not give. Empathy needs boundaries. Healthy empathy has boundaries. And being able to recognize what your role is and what your role isn't. And also recognizing that when you are enabling other people and taking on more and burning yourself out, you're not helping anybody. So we're allowed to have expectations of people's performance, but we can't have expectations about how somebody should feel about something, or how somebody should react to something, or how somebody should interpret our actions. Like, oh, I'm sorry you feel that way, is not an apology. But we are allowed to have expectations when it comes to our business in terms of behavior. But if people feel that they're in a supportive environment and they feel as though they're allowed to have those conversations and be supported, and you know where your role lies and they know where their role lies, then it's coming together to go, how do we fix this in a way that is mutually beneficial? Does that make sense?
For me, that was helpful.
Yeah.
You picked up, and I think you mentioned that keyword framework. I think part of the conversation I had in the separate group was around that, recognizing that there's a slither or a gap in between, like particularly if there's the wheels have fallen off, or the nature of conflict is when you've got a gap between two parties in expectation and understanding. There's a gap, yeah. So empathy, I see that as a nice key ingredient to put into that space to help bridge that gap.
Absolutely.
So the follow-on question was from that, well, then what kind of tools and I think you used the keyword frameworks, what kind of tools and framework do we put in place to engage in the empathy to close the gap, really?
Yeah, so the thing that we talk about, we've got a lovely language tool, it's called the Sports Bra tool. And it's so easy to remember, and it works in every situation. But what we do is we talk about a sports bra in terms, you've got to lift, support, keep safe, keep together. And lift is validate and recognize and thank and gratitude, all these sorts of things that makes that person go, okay, it was safe for me to actually share my thing. Look at what is within your remit to support that person. Look at whether that person is safe in terms of privacy as well as physical safety, and then look at strategies that you can build together in order to come up with a mutually beneficial solution. Or, I mean, if it's a mental health conversation, let's say, it's like, let's see what's available. You don't have to have all the answers. You're allowed to say, look, I don't know, let's figure it out. So we talk about that a lot. But usually that's in like the half-day workshop, because we really need to brainstorm at workshop it, pull it apart. So that's one. The other thing is, in the online learning center in Qualk, we do have a workplace conflict course that's actually really good, and that can give some other strategies if we are in that conflict space. But as a general rule, like all the research shows, the more you can acknowledge emotions, and in that lift piece, the validate trust piece, that's where the good stuff happens.
Yep, that makes sense.
Okay, so that's, I mean, that's my framework that I use, and it works in every situation. And all you got to do is think of support for. The how piece is really important, and the self-care piece for a lot of people is the way to start. And it will be boundaries. It'll be defining your role. It'll be having a look at where your values lie. Like if you've always gone, I'm a Virgo, I'm a perfectionist, then that's how you define yourself. And if somebody tells you something vulnerable, if you come up against a situation, you're going to try and have the right answers and come up with the best answers and all that sort of stuff. I have a podcast, and you can see there's a few episodes there. So I've got empathy and leadership, empathy and sales, and I do talk to Kian about social enterprise and empathy and sales. Empathy and entrepreneurship was an absolute corker of a one in terms of self-care and entrepreneurship. And then if you are working with people who are grieving, oh my wordy word, get your tissues out and do empathy and grief. It's beautiful. But I talk about a lot of this sort of stuff in sessions. Like we do workshops about empathy and social enterprise, and for leadership and teams and all that sort of stuff. I have an online course. I've got a free online course on empathy and writing empathy in emails. I've got a quiz, I've got a podcast, I've got all the things. But because I'm in this using leadership and business as a force for good, empathy has to be at the heart of that. Because, I mean, there's another research paper that talks about if you have to start with the active empathetic listening as a way to get positive business results, because that's what leads to workplace well-being. It's not, if you start with workplace well-being and go, hey, we've got apples in the break room and everybody can do yoga on a Friday, and you don't have an empathetic culture to start with, everybody's going to go, whatever. But if you have an empathetic culture to start with, and you work really hard with like a leadership commitment and really putting things in place to make this a reality for your staff, your beneficiaries, then apples in the break room is like, well, thanks, dude. That's awesome. So that's my details. Reach out to me, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, wherever you like.
Thank you, Leanne. That was amazing.